Welcome to the chaos sector. We return to the matrix. We called it. Although there was a concern about corruption claiming the day. It didn't happen, but Democrats are definitely not going away quietly. Donald Trump has been elected the 47th president of the United States in a landslide. All of the magic pixie dust didn't work this time around. The Holly weird celebrities didn't work this time around. And using women's rights as a political football didn't work this time around. The American people spoke, and they didn't want anything Kamala Harris was selling. This is political karma, because Democrats thought they could get away with forcing a candidate on the American people without those voters having a voice. She had a horrible approval rating as vice president, horrible as the borders are, and ran a horrible presidential campaign. Harris was dazed and confused, and her fellow Democrats only used her as a way to push their progressive ideology into law. They quickly faded away once it became evident she was, well, dazed and confused. As we mentioned, those polls were presented in attempts to sway voters, thinking that Harris was competing with Trump. Gaslighting, of course. The internal polls reflected what the numbers really were, and that was Trump winning by a landslide. Of course, you had your feminists jumping on social media, crying and whining about the election. You had your soy boys crying and whining about the election as well. Nobody cares, to be honest. They're silly little spoiled brats, who may not be spoiled in a financial sense, but spoiled in forcing their ideology upon society. But think about the wacky liberals and progressives. We take one example, and that's Oregon's Governor Tina Kotek. This lunatic actually legalized hard drugs in the state of Oregon. Now, why in the world would anyone think this person cares about the people if she is decriminalizing hard drugs? Her so-called reason for this is to focus more on rehabilitation rather than criminal punishment. Bullshit. If that were the case, then just invest more in rehabilitation services and programs. It was to encourage more drug use, which led to more of it. An increase in other drug-related crimes, and the state decided a few months ago, let's recriminalize these drugs. Our drug experiment could lead to the destruction of our state. This is an example of why Kamala Harris was destroyed in the election, because the American people are not in favor of these ideals and policies. They want to live a safe, peaceful, and successful life and provide that same future for their children. But the mainstream media, what got into them? Because they immediately turned on the American people and blamed them for Trump being elected. We'll get into that, but let's listen to wacko Eddie Glaude on the Ollie Velshi show on MSNBC. I found this interview really hilarious.
Joining me now, Eddie Glaude Jr., Distinguished Professor of African American Studies at Princeton University, author of several books, including Begin Again, James Baldwin's America and Its Urgent Lessons for Our Own, and his more recent and remarkably important book, We Are the Leaders We Have Been Looking For. Eddie, it is good to see you. Thank you. I've been reading what you've been putting out this week. I've been listening to your various appearances on TV, and we need your wisdom in this moment. And in your book, Begin Again, you write about how James Baldwin his travels in the South transformed his understanding of Americans. I want to read from what you wrote. What shook Baldwin at his core was a realization of the nature of the heathen. The white Southerner had to lie continuously to himself in order to justify his world. Lie that the black people around him were inferior. Lie about what he was doing under the cover of night. Lie that he was Christian. For Baldwin, the accumulation of lies suffocated the white Southerner, end quote. And like Baldwin, Eddie, you believe that we cannot move forward as a country until we confront and then knock down these lies.
Velshi is human filth, Glaude is as well. But Velshi settled in the little cozy pocket of racial mudslinging and has made a career off of it, just like other race hustlers. What he just blabbered about, for one, it were Southern Democrats who were to blame, but he overlooks that. But second, that has nothing to do with this election. Unless Velshi and Glaude are suggesting that non-white Americans somehow were not aware of the very racism they claim Trump has against them. How do you square all of this nonsense? Because it's not just white people who voted for Trump, We all know they're trying to wiggle that in, but you can't. They want to blame white people so bad. How about blaming your horrible candidate and the policies she proposed? But let's continue.
Absolutely, Ali. Thank you so much for that introduction, the commentary. It's spot on. It seems to me that these moments require an honest confrontation with who we are. And we're already engaged in the game of illusions, in the kind of construction of fantasies, right? That really what's motivating us is just simply economic insecurity, inflation, and the like. And of course, those issues matter. But when we look concretely at what's happening, when we look at what follows Donald Trump in his wake, we see all of this violence. We see all of this racial vitriol. We hear Fuentes declaring that he now owns women's bodies and the like. We have to begin to ask ourselves an honest question. Why is there a correlation between kind of those who support Donald Trump and this ugliness? Because it's this ugliness that's the fuel of Trumpism. Richard Slotkin, the historian, has said that we are in a second lost cause now. That we're in a moment in which there's a reassertion of the lie. Now, what does that mean in its details? Remember what's at the heart of the lost cause. The heart of the lost cause is a refusal to accept what was the actual for the Civil War. It wasn't slavery. It wasn't slavery, Allie. It was economics.
Cat got your tongue? What does slavery have to do with Donald Trump and this election? He is trying to force racism and the history of racism into the results of the election, yet is running into a brick wall. Again, black men, Hispanic men and women, Mexican American men and women, Puerto Rican men and women, Asian men and women, white men and women, and every other racial group voted for Donald Trump. He won not only the electoral vote, but also the popular vote. It was a political bloodbath. Glaude and Velshi are trying to suggest that Trump is once again Hitler and using key issues, such as the economy, to manipulate the voters. Democrats find ways to rationalize their garbage, but they're not slick enough. They need more WD-40. Let's continue.
And here we are in this moment, engaged in a similar denial.
And that's interesting because there are discussions and there will be postmortems about whether the Democratic Party was too left or engaged in causes that were too woke. But in the end, it is the response, not perhaps to that, but just to the idea that this country is changing from people who feel endangered and who are creating new reasons to make excuses for what is fundamentally bigotry, misogyny, and to some degree the hubris that America can't go wrong.
Now, we just listed the groups that voted for Donald Trump, right? Now, who exactly is Velshi referring to, who are creating new reasons for excuses for supporting bigotry? White people, of course, but you see, he can't pinpoint any demographic of voter to blame for this because it doesn't exist, for one. But the main problem is you have groups that fall within the racial divide, who are depicted as the victims against the oppressor, who voted for Trump, who is considered the oppressor in their view. So again, you can't directly blame anyone. You end up blabbering a bunch of pseudo-intellectual vomit out here. Let's continue.
Right. Baldwin said the horror of America is that it's changing all the time but never changes at all. There's something like this eternal return because we're dealing with the consequences of the tragic choice at the beginning of the Republic. Right, the choice that we reconcile, where we reconcile democratic principles with the reality, with the institution of slavery, with the subordination of women, with the exploitation of children, the exploitation of workers, with the genocide of native peoples, that there is this kind of gook.
Wait, did he just say the exploitation of children? Hold on, I think I might have heard him wrong. I want to be sure I heard what I think I heard. Let's go back over that for a moment.
With the subordination of women, with the exploitation of children, the exploitation of workers.
Exploitation of children. Well, it seems your party has done a lot of exploiting of children over the last 10 years, don't you think? Child pornography distributed to elementaries and middle schools, provoking children to explore sexuality, which also leads to sexual curiosity among their peers. Drag queens dressed highly sexual and hideous, by the way, who have also been charged with, guess what, pedophilia. Wacky parents exploiting their children out in public as the opposite sex, parading them around like gender-altering test subjects in their sick social experiments. And this is why the American people pushed the Democrats to the side, because they support the destruction of children. Complete madness. Let's continue.
Within which the American project came into being. And to confront that is not to condemn us to the gallows.
No.
To confront that is actually to create the conditions to release us into a new way of being. But let me say this, Allie, really quickly. I come out of a tradition that has had to deal with the violence of when the fever dream spikes. There are too many people in my tradition who've lost folk. My professor, Albert Rabbitoe, who wrote Slave Religion, lost his dad. He didn't grow up with his father. Why? Because a Mississippi store shop owner shot him in the head because he dared to confront him over the way he treated his wife. This isn't some abstract issue for us.
So, that scenario he just painted is related to a Trump administration. How exactly? Is he suggesting that Trump will enforce modern Jim Crow laws? Besides it being a load of race-baiting cow dung, Trump was already the president and didn't do anything close to racist in his administration. And even before that, he wasn't racist, according to everyone in Hollywood, the sports world, the music industry, mainstream media, celebrity journalists, right? You know what this is? This is one big Hillary Clinton crybaby robotic machine. Like a political Voltron. They're all complaining, summoning the essence of the biggest crybaby in the Democratic Party, Hillary Clinton. Yes, don't think she isn't lurking in the shadows, still furious that her empire didn't become a reality. And see, this is a double-edged sword for Democrats because they actually have to complain, because if they don't, then that means they accept Trump as the president, which means they accept the very person they deemed to be a threat to democracy. So they have to carry on the deception till the end of time. It's madness.
The idea of how we're going to survive and get to the other side when it seems as if the country has lost its damn mind takes on a real tangible kind of feeling, because my mom and my dad grew up in Jim Crow, Mississippi. This isn't slavery, right? This is immediate for some people.
Right.
I'm done. They can't address the actual election itself because they would have to blame non-white voters for Trump's victory. So they simply talk about race and racism. I mean, heck, it's been paying their bills all this time. So why not keep going to that well, scraping the edges for droplets of water?
Yep, and the major problem for mainstream media now is they have the nation's spotlight on them as they squirm around trying to blame someone for Harris's epic defeat. Just come out and say it already. Black men are sellouts, Hispanic men are sellouts, and all of them, including other groups of people, are too stupid to see that Trump is a threat to democracy. That's what they want to say, especially the progressives in the party. They don't believe that. Heck, they don't believe what they themselves are spewing out here about Trump. But how long can they tiptoe around the fact that they were wrong for almost 10 years, and twice, even 3 times if we include the 2020 election, that the American people have voted for a man they have deemed Hitler and a threat to democracy? How long do you think your network can survive, going into Trump's second term? They have already lost a lot of viewers, lost a lot of subscribers on their social media channels, and even registered Democrats have distanced themselves from this agenda. When will they just accept the facts? It won't happen, but that would lead to their own demise. Let's continue.
But back in the Civil War, here's an interesting question. Because back in the Civil War, there were a whole bunch of Southerners who justified this on the basis of Southern chivalry, on the basis of states' rights, everything but slavery. And most of the people who fought and died in that war had no particular personal relationship to slavery. They did not hold slaves, and yet they bought wholesale into this idea. This time we had people talking about, you're not hearing us, you're invested in issues we don't want, it's inflation.
This time? What time? Are you claiming that there is actual slavery existing in America? Are you suggesting that Trump will attempt to enslave American citizens? Because you mentioned slavery and the Civil War, that's one time. Then you stated, this time. So Velshi is literally suggesting that slavery will come back under a Trump administration. You see, we don't let them slip this garbage in undetected. Listen again, as Velshi claims that slavery is potentially coming back.
And most of the people who fought and died in that war had no particular personal relationship to slavery. They did not hold slaves, and yet they bought wholesale into this idea. This time we had people talking about, you're not hearing us, you're invested in issues we don't want, it's inflation.
Now don't think that Velshi is using slavery, the Civil War, and how he claims many weren't personally invested in the direct fight to end slavery, as a correlation to how current American citizens so-called fought in supporting Trump. Because the goddamn correlation doesn't make sense. If you apply that concept to slavery and the Civil War, Velshi is suggesting that the voters voted for Trump regarding issues that don't directly affect them, or they are not actually concerned about. Now what issue that Trump has focused on in his campaign is something any American citizen isn't concerned about or doesn't directly affect them. Let's see. The economy, that affects everyone, regardless of economic class. The border, it may not affect everyone, but the law does matter, especially if illegal immigrants are crossing the border raping, murdering, and trafficking drugs into the country. These two issues were the main focus and the major difference in both presidential campaigns. And then if we factor in the other issues in both campaigns, just more of the same. Women's rights and abortion, that affects everyone, including men. I know they like to dismiss men in that equation, but men are also husbands. Voters may not personally disagree with abortion, but definitely aren't supporting such a rabid push for it because it manifests into supporting murder in their view. Then you have transgender rights, that affects everyone, as everyone has to accept a certain belief and law that compromises the rights of actual women and girls. Mothers care about this, fathers care about this, grandparents care about this, sisters and brothers, cousins, aunts and uncles, family friends, everyone cares about this issue to some degree. And others are deeply concerned as well. So every policy and ideology that Velshi is trying to suggest voters don't have any direct or indirect interest in is wrong. You may not concern yourself with it personally, but it doesn't mean you don't care about the fabric of American culture and society. And the election results proved this, not some blabbering trash Velshi is spewing out there. He's a psychopath. I need you guys to really put this into perspective, using slavery as a political football and attaching it to the American voters. Now if we apply Velshi's wacky analogy, he is claiming that citizens today who voted for Trump are not affected by, or concerned about, the issues facing the country, and correlates this lie with how citizens who fought in the Civil War weren't all personally affected by slavery. Do you see this madness? That's one horrible scenario, but then you have what's more likely here. Velshi is claiming that Trump will actually bring back slavery. And it's actually rhetoric the left has been spewing lately anyway, claiming women will cease to exist, many politicians will be imprisoned, all of this fear-mongering. So yes, Velshi is claiming slavery will exist under a Trump administration.
A lot of it was bad information, it was lies being believed, but most people would not acknowledge what you are saying and what James Baldwin is saying, that we are still preserving a lie. How do you have that conversation with people whose vote preserved a lie, preserved misogyny, preserved racism, preserved the patriarchy, and preserved the hubris, who don't actually believe that's what they did? And again, my point is, in the Civil War, there are people who engaged in it thinking they were fighting for something else, and they were not.
Now, what was the key term Velshi used? Civil War. Some wondered what our previous episode was about. Trump got reelected, but there is a civil war brewing in the United States. But Velshi claims that those who fought in the Civil War were fighting for a cause that they thought was the reason for the war. Not sure who gives him the credentials to make that claim. He's not an historian, he's just some political puppet for the Democratic Party, the very party who in fact fought to keep people enslaved in that Civil War you refer to. So he's running in circles, contradicting himself. Yet, he is trying to suggest that the American people who voted for Trump blindly voted for him because they were concerned about the economy, inflation, immigration, foreign relations, and other social issues, and that Trump is somehow not fighting for those issues to be addressed and fixed? Wow. Oh, I see. So Trump has a sinister plot to turn America into Nazi Germany, and is using common problems and concerns of the American people to get elected as president, then make everyone slaves to his dictatorship. Yep, that's what Velshi and Glaude are suggesting. Oh my, let's continue.
You know, that's a hard question to answer. I've been trying to figure it out. How do you tell people? I mean, I was having this argument just this morning with folk that their numbers around black voters in the 2024 election were just wrong. How do we deal in a world where passion overruns reason, where we're in different information ecosystems, where we don't agree on just simply basic facts? I don't know. The only thing I do know is that we can't capitulate to it. We can't try to figure out how to make those folk comfortable. We have to continue to tell the truth. We have to do what Barnaby the Scrivener did in Melville's story, right? We have to say, I prefer not to. And part of the worry is that because of the nature of the election, too many people want to consent and concede to the lie that folk are telling folk. You know, Americans prefer their illusion straight, no chaser. That's what Eugene O'Neill was.
So in context of the election results, where Kamala Harris couldn't convince the majority of the country to vote for her, Glaude is blabbering nonsense in the segment, not pinpointing an actual consequential reason for Trump's victory. Let me elaborate. The so-called consequential reason is that the American people are complacent with Trump's racism, bigotry, and misogyny. But for him to assert this as a consequential reason, he would also have to assert that the American people also share those characteristics. And if we peel back that layer, this would be the same narrative for the previous election and the one before that. So he's stuck in a corner, where either you're claiming the American people, including non-whites, also share those characteristics you claim Trump has, or they are oblivious to those characteristics, or they just don't care about those characteristics, or it's a combination of all of them. You can't avoid the results of the election and who the American people chose as their president. And to allude to them being stupid, as that's the safest insult, as opposed to calling them racist, you're insulting more than half of the country. But let's wrap it up.
Exploring in the Iceman Cometh. We have to shatter those illusions with the truth and then a bit more, it seems to me.
You write a book. I'm going to step over here and grab it because I brought it with me. Your book. I got Born Again, but your newer book speaks about leadership. I want to ask you about that in this moment. For this mission that you and I are discussing this morning, for the future, do we have the leaders in place to do what we need to do, to take this mission forward, to say, finally, let us put this myth and this lie about who we are and our past away and do something else, be the best we can be? Are we in a position to do that right now?
So Velshi is alluding to once again, the United States being a racist country, including the non-white American voters who voted for a racist, and their mission is to cleanse America of this racism. Wait, let's dig into it for a moment. The white Americans are deemed racist in their view for supporting Trump. and the non-white Americans are deemed stupid in their view. You see? Now isn't this one of the so-called philosophies that racists have about non-white people? Aren't you doing the same thing? It's astonishing. But their mission is to whine and complain about Trump getting elected, and they will simply sit in their chairs, have panel discussions about Trump, just like they did in 2016. Because the so-called mission to cleanse America of racism is an illusion, because racism is an illusion itself. How will you cleanse something out that doesn't exist? Mind you, we're in the political matrix, don't fall asleep. The Democratic Party has humiliated themselves with Kamala Harris being the presidential candidate. There were better candidates they could have ran, but they chose Harris. And it showed that they were so concerned with appealing to the progressive wing of the party, they would risk losing literally everything. Because now, as Harris represented the party, it's gonna be difficult to detach themselves from the progressive ideology that has taken over the party. That's where most of the anti-Trump fever is coming from, not the moderate Democrats in the party. So unless they are willing to cleanse their own party of the garbage that has been represented to the American people, they are doomed. And whining about Trump for 4 more years will only lead to someone like J.D. Vance getting elected president in 2028. Meanwhile, Velshi and Glaude will just be spewing out pseudo-intellectual racial rhetoric as Republicans keep obtaining presidential power.
Well, I don't know if we are, but we must be. I do know that we have to stop playing games. You know, the Democratic Leadership Council, engaged in this triangulation. It thought that what it needed to do was to distance the Democratic Party from unions and its base, black folk and the like, and make its way toward the right and kind of try to triangulate and take the issues from Reagan, and that gave us Bill Clinton, right? And we've been dealing with that as we've been trying to, Democrats have been kind of engaged in this forlorn romantic kind of tryst. They always want to get the Reagan Democrats back, right? And what we've been doing is conceding the terms of the fight. Part of what must happen in this moment is that we must reject the framework of our politics.
Yes, Democrats should reject the framework of their politics, because it led to a landslide victory for Donald Trump. The framework of your politics dumped millions of immigrants, including illegal immigrants, into the country, which led to massive allocation of local and state resources to those individuals. The framework of your politics allowed illegal immigrants to terrorize communities by raping and murdering women and girls, child and drug trafficking, and even signed executive orders to place these people on the United States Census, and then allowed them to legally vote in a United States election? The framework of your politics has had massive spending, disguising bills as genuine legislation when it was to essentially spend money outside of the United States. Burning through the wallet, creating record numbers of inflation, which resulted in higher cost of everyday goods. The framework of your politics resulted in children being exposed to child pornographic material, which the schools allowed to exist in their libraries. The framework of your politics is so compelled to resist common sense, you all can't even define what a woman is, yet are fighting for their rights? How many trans women are seen fighting for abortion rights? Oh, let me guess, 0, because they're not women. The framework of your politics has done away with moderate policy makers and has completely jumped off the cliff into the abyss of sickness. I could keep going, but that's enough.
And people who are current leaders can do it. But it all depends if they have the courage, Alan.
Yeah.
But I know what has to happen. We have to find out. We have to take responsibility for this thing.
Yes.
And we're going to have to say no and engage the battle. Although it's very hard. I can't begin to tell you how distrustful I am right now.
Yeah,
What have these people done?
Yeah, no, and it's us. It is us. I mean, that's the hard part about this. This wasn't a mistake this time around, and it's important for us to understand that we have done this to ourselves. You may not have, and I may not have at the ballot box or in our efforts, but we as a country are making some bad decisions that we are now going to have to face up to. And maybe that's the good part, Eddie, that maybe now that reckoning will be upon us, because some bad things are going to happen in the next few years, and the fight must continue. And I thank you for it, my friend. I thank you for everything that you've done for us, the important books, the analysis that you put out there, and the friend that you've been to this show. Eddie Glaude Jr. is a distinguished professor of African American Studies at Princeton University. He's the author of multiple important books, including We Are the Leaders We Have Been Looking For and Begin Again, James Baldwin's America and Its Urgent Lessons for Our Own.
I want to keep reiterating in this discussion, they never pointed to a direct reason that Trump was elected over Harris. No analysis of the voting base from gender, race, economic status. None of that was broken down. Because they couldn't do that. So they alluded to the American people being the problem, which is insulting the majority of Americans who voted. How smug and dismissive of Velshi in particular, because he has always done this. He uses black guests to latch on to acting as an echo chamber of that very dishonest black person spewing nonsense on his show, such as Eddie Glaude. They spent most of this segment blabbering about slavery and racism, not policies. nor how horrible Harris carried out her campaign. They know it was a train wreck, and since MSNBC has become basically anti-Trump in everything they do, they can't drive in any other direction but attacking Trump. The facts are staring them right in the face as the American people made their choice. And the facts are the candidate for the Democratic Party was simply destroyed, hands down. It wasn't about gender, it wasn't about race, it was about the lack of inspiration, lack of messaging, lack of effective policy proposals. I mean, what the hell did you think would happen? Did you think Americans would vote for her simply because she's a woman? Simply because she's a woman of color? They do not live in your virtue signaling reality. Identity politics does not ensure you have enough money in your bank account to survive month to month. And that concern was at the core of the American voters' choice for president. But let Velshi and Glaude tell it, oh, you know, the American people have made a horrible decision and they will suffer because of it. They are ignorant, clueless, easily duped peasants who need to be educated politically. They are so stupid, we don't even attempt to speak in a dumbed-down language or lingo, we just ignore them. You have run-down inner city neighborhoods, right? What do you think Kamala Harris would do for those inner cities? Absolutely nothing, just like the Democratic mayors and governors. Now, what about Trump? What do you think he would do for those inner cities? He will try to fix them, and it will really put pressure on those Democratic governors and mayors, as they will be forced to do something about it. Because Trump is the loudmouth in politics, and if he proposes to improve the condition of those inner cities, it puts a spotlight on the Democrats who oversee those communities. I wouldn't be surprised if he signs a stimulus package for the American people. Kamala Harris could have proposed this as a way to show compassion for the financial struggles many citizens faced. But she is not a leader, so the thoughts floating around in her bubbly brain never generated such concern. And you can't make someone who follows orders a leader. They will only crumble under the pressure, as those who pull their strings determine their every move. And those who pulled the strings on Harris's back are now silent, hiding in the shadows. The president has to be able to lead the nation, a symbol of strength, stability, security, and even prosperity. Trump offers this, and this is what Velshi and Glaude oppose. They want misery. It loves company, right? As we mentioned, Democrats will not go into the night quietly. There will be chaos on January 6th. And trust me, it will be the same people rioting and protesting this election as it was in the previous election. The truth is knocking at their doorsteps. This is the chaos sector.